Fortunately, I saw that. It's because it's at the bottom. It's because I don't have my glasses on. That's what it is. Okay, Q&A. Yes.
So I get why the text says the Holy Spirit came for our salvation, but how and why did the Holy Spirit come for mankind specifically? Wait, Christ.
You were mixing your two questions, aren't you? Because you were thinking of the conception question,
No,
right?
that's how I wrote that.
That's all right. Hey, I was trying to save you there. You're supposed to go with that. Well, say the second part again, though. So
Okay.
he came for...
It came for mankind specifically. Because it says here in the text, for us men and for our salvation.
Right.
Salvation, that's easy.
Yeah. The way I take it, and there may be commentaries on this that can explain it better than I can if they were trying to deal with a specific heresy. Who knows? Maybe they had Apollinarianism in view. I don't know, though. I think that was still kind of on the stove during the 320s. But you could say that it's a redundancy. That's one thing you could say. But I don't think they waste words in creeds. You know, when 300-some pastors get together. So you could say either it's an emphasis, repetition for emphasis, or which more likely you can say that it's an emphasizing of a specific, of a general thing, that he's saving the human nature. Maybe they still were kind of punching back at Gnosticism while they were dealing with some of these other. I don't know. I don't know all the reasons why they said both, but you can see why both are true, though. Hopefully, though. Because contained in salvation is the saving of human nature. Yep.
You mentioned Apollinarianism. Is there any famous person or group today that still holds to Apollinarianism or a version of that?
Not an organized group, but you do hear it all the time when... So the way it shows up is more just by somebody running into Matthew 24:36. Of that day or hour, no one knows, not even the Son, only the Father. What's going on there? And then you explain, he's speaking of the human nature, just like Luke 2:40, somewhere in there, 2:52, that he grew in wisdom and stature. Or Hebrews 4 says that he learned obedience. Or the woman, when he says, "Who touched me?" Then there's other examples. He means everything he's saying there. That's the human mind. The human mind, as human, is not omniscient. Just like, and we have no problem saying this body is not omnipresent. But that, I think, throws people for a loop because they just haven't learned the doctrine of the two natures yet. And so maybe they think it's just sort of a convenient thing that we're pulling out to save the day when we get to those verses. But no, that's always been the answer that the church has given in those situations. So I don't know that there's an organized movement that would do it, but I think we're just ignorant as evangelicals, and so we're not aware of the correction that would have been given to Apollinarius. Yeah. Yep.
Was the factor of Jesus being sinless partially due to him not having a biological earthly father, so he wouldn't be under the federal headship of Adam?
Yeah, as a sign. I think that goes with the sign part. Sproul was asked this very question. And I don't know if it was because somebody had the Immaculate Conception in mind as a contrast, but he basically said that, just like God created Adam, so he created Christ. Perfect. And that comes up in the context, could he have sinned? And that gets into a whole thing too. We'll do that in the future. But he was sinless in that sense that he was created with a perfect human nature. Sproul said, and I agree with this would be a problem if let's throw some more words at you. If you're familiar with the words creationism versus traducianism. Creationism, not in the sense of creating the world, But this is now an answer to the question, where do babies come from? It's not that. It's how does the sin nature, it's that, but how does the sin nature get passed down? Does God create the human soul each time, which I think they would even agree with, but the traducianists is going to focus on it being something like hereditary. I don't want to straw man their view. Hereditary. But it's not genetic anyway. Okay, so I would just say that...
like spiritual genetics?
I don't know I don't know what words they would use. Because first of all, that view existed before genetics were around anyway.
Yeah.
Before genetics were known about. They were around. But yeah, the reason this is not a problem for us is that if you take the creationist position, God is creating each new soul right away. In the case of the virgin birth, you have a miracle where he's bypassing a human father. So I'm not saying there's not more to it, but there's at least that going on. So you don't have to resort to things like the Immaculate Conception, which doesn't solve the problem anyway. Yes.
I've just got a lot of questions.
That's all right. That's good.
Excuse me for this. So I was listening to a pastor recently who said, and this is verbatim, that the Holy Spirit impregnated Mary.
Mm-hmm.
How and why is this wrong?
Yeah, so not to be too anticlimactic here, but you'd answer that really the same way.
Yeah.
Is that God creates ex nihilo. The language of conception is appropriate. Like I said, anytime it's a miracle, he's invading nature. So there's no... people have struggled with that, but he was in a womb, and her womb was sinful. Well, that whole thing. By that, if you want to extend that logic, he was in a home with them, and they were sinful. He hung out with tax collectors and sinners, and they were sinful. So that doesn't really affect anything negatively like people think it would, because that's not the way sin works anyway, physically. So I'd answer that the same way.
Yeah. Unless someone else wants to go. Or you can...
No.
Okay.
We got time for one more.
Joey's been thinking about these all week.
Yeah.
This
Or
afternoon, I just remembered. Really easy one.
Mm-hmm.
Mind explaining how Mary is the mother of God?
Right, so that's the whole... I have to use more Greek and Latin words here.
Sorry.
So the Theotokos, God-bearer, when whoever first started using it around the controversy of the century later than this Nicene controversy. If you rightly use, excuse me, but I will define it, the communicatio idiomatum. It's Latin for the sharing of the properties, or the communication of the properties. Okay, so let me give you a Bible version of this. Acts 20:27 or 28, where Paul is saying that God, the Holy Spirit raised up elders for shepherd the church of God. There it is. Shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his blood. God doesn't bleed. So what does he mean by saying God's blood? Well, you say, well, he obviously means Christ. I know he means that. But he doesn't say the word Christ. So can he say God and his blood? Yes, because of this concept of the communicatio idiomatum. So here's what it is. The two natures of Christ, the divine nature and the human nature. What is true of one of the natures can be attributed to the whole of the person, so long as you do not confuse one of the natures with the other nature. Does that make sense? So you can say, and so some people struggle with this. Again, I think it's the same Wesley hymn, but I think on this point, Charles Wesley got his theology better. That, was it this hymn? Anyway, that God,
My God should die.
yeah, there you go, that my God should die for me. Did God die? Well, not if you mean the heresy of patripassianism, the Father suffering. So God, in the divine essence, cannot suffer. That's the impassibility of God. In his human nature, Christ can suffer. But Christ is God. And so I can properly say, in one sense, that God suffered and died. And here's the punchline. I can say in one sense, and so long as I only mean it in that sense, that Mary gave birth to God. Now, if you don't specify that, then you should be thrown out of the church and go back to Rome. Because, anyway, I'll go into that. I've picked on Rome enough tonight. I did a little bit this morning as well. I'm sorry, you can never... You're right about that. Any other questions? Okay.